Shawn and Gale would like to come up. Thank you. Great.
I want to say thank you to Bill for such a lively presentation performance tonight. Thank you to all of you for being here. I feel such a sense of community in New Westminster, or this community, and I'm looking forward to going with it. I'm going to read a short story from my collection of short stories, The Stories That Make Us. The first book I published in 2015, and it was under the mentorship of David Bergen while I was at Humber School for Writers that I wrote this. It's really close to my heart, and I feel, even though it was my first book, it's my finest. A gardener by choice. Willie finished worshiping the sun, the only God he trusted, and rose up from his knees and swiped the dirt off his trousers. He'd been watching through the chain-link fence for some time, feeling its warmth efface the coolness of early morn as it climbed above the eastern horizon. How many years had he performed this ceremony? Did it matter? Since he'd been condemned to die in prison, Willie disregarded time. He viewed it as insignificant as the days he walked as a free man, as the family he longed for but never held, and as the thousands of vacant faces he'd seen since his arrest. Unrepentant bank robber pays with mortal days, read the headline in the newspaper. Willie's co-accused, Nathaniel Briggs, had testified against him for a reduced sentence. He didn't mind, though. Up until that point, Willie's life had been a cycle: fear, crime, arrest, and relief. Just like that, so he'd gotten used to it. On the clement breeze, wafts of rose were mingling with lavender, and somewhere small birds were twittering. He smiled and thought how swell life was right then. Heck, it had been for 30, 40, perhaps 50 years now. He shut his eyes, inhaling deeply, and tilted back his head until the sun shone full on his face. He basked a moment, and then headed off to work. Willie meandered around the prison's grounds throughout the morning, stopping here and there to yank weeds from the dry flower beds and cracks in the asphalt. Whenever he passed by other cons or guards, he refused to acknowledge them. They were distractions. He didn't need this early in the day. As always, his mind gradually slipped into a utopian drift, remembering the past while revolving the present without ever thinking of tomorrow. No visitors, no phone calls, no letters. That was how he'd managed to keep it together over the years. How foolish the other cons were for shirking their gardening duties, he thought. Not him, no sirree. He remained committed, the only one for all these years. In the beginning, he too disliked his position as gardener, but as the days, months, and years bled together, he found solace in the role. He worked in the day, dreamt in the night, and existed somewhere in between. You see, he'd attained in prison what he could never get in the real world: to feel safe, because that was all he'd ever yearned for. Not abandoned by his father, not starved and beaten by his drunken mother, and not deserted at St. Christopher's orphanage, where the boys punched and kicked him and the priest flogged him with straps until his flesh wept blood. He'd learned to fear the world more and more and more every year. Hours passed, with Willies God rising high, and when he arrived at a rectangular flower bed by the infirmary, he heard a distant siren warble on the breeze. He lifted his hand and hooded his eyes. Over the coils of rusty razor wire quivering atop the fence, and beyond the forest of maples and pines, Willie spied a vast metropolis of concrete and glass and polished steel. A shiver raced up his spine, and bile rose from his gut. He spat at the earth. He'd witnessed this metropolis evolve and spread every year since his arrival, as if it were some invasive weed choking out the landscape. He shook his head and vowed once again to never so much as peek at it. Scowling, he hunched over and tore a stinging nettle from the earth and whipped it over his shoulder. Come sunset, he found himself roaming toward the prison's graveyard, a sanctuary he knew well. He'd buried friends there, and one day he would join them. For this reason, he maintained it with a sacred pride. And as he passed through the wrought iron gate, his eyes began to water. Crows cawed from their perch on the digger's shed and the weather vane atop it. Willie hobbled to the northeastern corner. He stooped and began to weed rue and rosemary around a headstone amongst the many others that were forgotten, as all the men were underneath them. As he finished up and prepared to move up to another, he heard a voice jabber behind him, so he spun around. Looney Sam, an old safecracker he'd known for 40, 50, maybe 60 years now, glared at him with rheumy eyes, as if looking right on through him. "Startled me good, pal," said Willie, brushing the dirt from his hands. Sam clawed at his rusty beard. "Thought you dusted out," said Willie. "Ain't seen you for a while." Sam's face was deadpan. Willie continued. "I should have known you'd kick off here. Once a fellow been in a long while, nowhere else to go. No family, no friends." Willie waved toward the metropolis. "Besides, it's scary out there." Sam slowly raised his arm and pointed west. A recollection lurked on the edge of shadow in Willie's mind, but he refused to look west. Sam grinned wickedly as if privy to an unspoken jest. He then shrugged his shoulders and turned, and as he limped away, he began to hum a tune of sorrow. Willie trembled as Sam departed. Glancing around, he searched for a distraction, a person, something, anything to preoccupy his thoughts so his swell day of gardening wouldn't be ruined. And then deafening booms, 3 in rapid succession, pounded the air like a cannonade, tousling his hair, sucking at his eardrums. He dropped to his hands and knees like a bag of manure tossed from a trailer. An odor of fetid earth walloped him good, and he snapped his head back. The crows had launched into the air, kicking the weather vane into a spin. They orbited in a swarm, then swooped at Willie. He ducked. They soared up and over the razor wire and shot toward the forest. There was a tang in Willie's mouth, and the hair on his neck and arms bristled. He spotted a purplish cloud in the east, billowing and rolling swiftly toward the prison. He scrambled away over the plots like a whipped mongrel about to get another dose. The cloud rolled overhead and darkened the earth as it blotted out the last sliver of sun. Willie stopped and rose up on his knees, tottering side to side, and jammed the palms of his heels into his eye sockets. Then he thrust his outstretched hands skyward, moaning, searching, calling for his God as if an abandoned parishioner pleading for a miracle he knew would never come. "Hello, Willie." Gasping for breath, Willie whirled around. Jessup, a guard he'd known for a long, long time, stood behind him. Even in the cloudy twilight, Willie's rictus grin reflected in Jessup's sunglasses. Hanging his head, breathing deeply, Willie surrendered to the circumstance he now understood. "Is it time?" he asked. "Reckon so," said Jessup. "Did a fine job today." "I love to garden," said Willie, looking up, trying to compose himself. Jessup gestured a hand westward. "Maybe you ought to leave. Get the hell out of this place. Go. Be at peace." Willie gazed to the sprawling metropolis with its flickering lights, to the towering edifices of glittering glass and steel, and to the alien automobiles racing along arteries intertwined in bizarre patterns. He saw an otherworldly ritual he could neither grasp nor wish to, in its profound complexity and reverence for an existence which had forsaken men such as him. "No," said Willie. "I'll stay. It's safe here." Willie then brushed away the dirt from a lichen-covered headstone, and with his forefinger, he traced the grooves of the epitaph. William Tanner Holdsworth, 1900 to 1979, a gardener by choice.